Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. It is always a pleasure to collaborate with my colleagues at the Schenker Institute and with the terrific people all to my right. I don't know if there's any meaning to that. Happy Valentine's Day. I also learned that there's a week that starts today. It's new. It's called Love Teaching. So Love Teaching Week is from apparently February 14th to 21st, and it has a hashtag. Just thought you'd want to know. So I'm going to try and take a little bit of a big sweep look, initially at state plans, and then kind of pulling back to a larger picture of, well, so what can we do? And it's been very interesting to hear the tale of two states, which are very different, and very much reinforcing that AFT and LPI often think in very similar ways about approaches to good schooling and policy that supports that. So let me talk a little bit about kind of some small victories, some disappointments and disconnects, a couple of unknowns, and then kind of what next, because you're right, it is indeed too early to tell. So here in the wonk world of Washington, D.C., if you just think about this for a minute, so we have state plans, right? Then we have Department of Education formal feedback on the plans. Then we have the informal congressional feedback on the feedback. Too much, not enough, depending on where you sit on which side of the aisle, right? Then we have the reviews of the plans, some of which have actually, I think, been very helpful and inform the couple of things that I'm going to share with you in the next few minutes. But we've had Bellwether and Collaborative for Student Success, Achieve, CAP, Fair Test, ACTI, I believe, weighed in, and of course, Education Week. So then you also have not only the reviewers of the plans, but the reviewers of the reviewers. So I just want you to know that ESSA state plans are the gift that keeps on giving. But one of the things I worry about, I only heard this phrase the other day, I kind of like it, a technologist by the name of Aviv Ovadia. He was one of the first people to identify the fake news catastrophe that came upon us before the 2016 elections, used the term information apocalypse. In which people give up on finding the truth. ESSA is really complicated. I hope we don't succumb to an information apocalypse. I think instead we're more likely to have a cottage industry for the next several years about all this. But if we think about what's really most important in looking at where we are with ESSA and whether its promise is being actualized, it's what we care about most is what has the most potential over time to make the biggest difference for students and educators, and whether it's actually happening. So I'm going to share, as I said, a couple of small victories to start, and I think they're quite aligned with a number of the things that Jessica talked about, especially the ones that are the high leverage equity. Not all of these are. So obviously, across state plans so far, we're seeing more indicators and a greater variety of indicators of school quality and student success. Chronic absenteeism being one that is being used by a large number of states. But even more interesting and appropriate looks at suspension and discipline, as you talked about. A lot of attention to post-secondary readiness, college and career readiness in a number of ways, from SAT and ACT to AP, to career and tech programs, to dual enrollments. Also, states taking advantage of the extended graduation rate is another victory. Some of these victories are small and some larger. Science is getting some more attention, which is terrific. CAP helped us learn a little bit about Title II, where there's some really creative and interesting connections being made. I think Pennsylvania is actually a state where a lot is going on with that as well, but addressing educator pipeline issues, using programs like Educators Rising for that, focusing on diversity and grow your own programs. One state is even looking at year-long residencies for every teacher preparation program. Things like workplace experiences for CTE teachers. Seeing these in state plans is heartening. And 4 states have actually indicated that they are going to apply for the assessment pilot. I think more talked about it and backed away. But even those that are not applying for that pilot are still, many are still doing interesting work, as Jessica noted, in incorporating performance assessment into their accountability systems and into their work of education. I personally like the fact that at least a dozen states are using a descriptor, a text or a phrase, to describe school performance versus an A to F grade. 6 states are not providing a summative score at all. There is much greater recognition, although I think you'd see this a lot more in Pennsylvania than you would in Illinois. There's a much greater recognition of the testing problem, but for many states, they by and large have not done the work of fixing that or even are sure how. That yet remains to be dealt with. Dealing with test participation and opt-out issues seems to have occupied a lot more attention in the press than it actually has in how people deal with it in plans. It just has not been that much of a problem, though a few states seem unnecessarily punitive about it. Many are not. So if those are the sort of victories, small and medium victories for now, what are some of the disappointments? And again, I think this will echo what some of the other panelists have said. One of the areas of disappointment is stakeholder engagement in many states. It's been very uneven, both in terms of the process of engagement and in terms of its impact on the plan as submitted. And this is not without a number of organizations providing guides as to how to do that effectively, addressing some of the things Dan talked about, like when you hold the sessions. But of course, when it comes down to it, stakeholder engagement is not a box check, and it is based on ultimately relationships and respect, right? So if you're just having meetings for the sake of having meetings, it's not going to affect much. Where that kind of engagement and collaboration exists for real, I think it's a fair bet that your state plan is going to be better anyway, regardless of whether it's required in the law. I think I mentioned that testing, there are a number of efforts to reduce it and make it more coherent, but not nearly as many as there could be. But again, that may be something that we don't know enough about yet. I mean, states are doing assessments, if you will. But at least we know that there are some attempts to look at growth and not just proficiency. So one of the things that I think a lot of people have been concerned about, and certainly in the civil rights community, and I really did appreciate, Jessica, that you talked about what was good about NCLB and reminding us what we needed to preserve about that. But a concern about super subgroups, so combining English language learners, special education students, and minority students in ways that one could worry about masking inequity, and especially as we move to things like school improvement planning. So overall, I think the biggest disappointment in ESSA plans is that where they didn't have to be specific, they basically weren't. Although several states have provided pretty detailed plans for strong monitoring and evaluation of school improvement plans when it comes to that. A number have indicated a process for helping districts choose evidence-based interventions. The optimist in me says, well, they didn't have to be specific yet about those things, so that means they're taking more time to think about them. So you can decide if the optimist approach is the right one. So those are a few disappointments, not enough specificity on some really important things. Then there are a set of disconnects, and to me, I think this is what's most troubling for right now. And again, taking a broad brush. So disconnects between the stated goals of the plans and what's in them, right? What's actually being done. Graduation rates are another thing that are, it's very interesting to look at those, right? If you look across, you've got to set an annual rate of change, right? You've got to figure out how you're going to get to a goal. There's a huge amount of variety in the time that it's going to take to get to a graduation rate goal, right? And how much change is going to have to happen to get there. So if you take a state like New Mexico, which is pretty generally in the lowest quartile, it's suggesting by the time to its graduation rate goal, it's going to take a 2% improvement every year, when that has not been the trajectory of New Mexico in the past, and there's no real clear indication that it's going to be possible to do that. And when most other states are anticipating an average increase of, say, 1% from year to year. Some places are seeking the same ultimate trajectory for English language arts and math proficiency for all groups, yet despite indicating different targets for subgroups right now based on where they are. So these disconnects are everywhere. I think one of the biggest disconnects is between graduation rate goals and English language arts and math proficiency goals, right? So just to take as an example, round numbers. Say your longer range goal is 70% proficiency in English language arts, okay? And 80% proficiency in math. And your graduation rate target is 94%. Okay, so you're starting off with the notion that success looks like continuing to graduate students who are not college and career ready by your own standards. So big disconnect. So this points to the overall biggest disconnect, which is basically the lack of coherence. And I think the contrast between Pennsylvania and what Dan shared about Illinois shows that in many ways there's a lack of coherence across the plans. Pennsylvania is a real standout counterexample on coherence issues, both in terms of vision, the understandability of your indicators, if you will, use of stakeholder engagement, addressing proficiency as well as growth. There are a number of states where the governors did not even sign their own ESSA plans, right? So talk about lack of coherence. I think the biggest unknown of all is what will support for lowest performing schools look like. And I do appreciate that it is a small percentage. But it also happens to be a very important one for AFT, given the concentration of our members and the students they serve in places that tend to have challenges related to poverty and low performing schools. So it's a really serious area for us. That's $1 billion that's going to be spent on lowest performing schools, and we literally don't know how it's going to be addressed in most states. So the other big unknown, though, what if there's good stuff that we just haven't seen yet, right? Maybe we just don't know because it's not in the plan. Plans aren't everything. Maybe there are awesome assessment audits about to happen. Maybe there are fabulous surveys of educators that are going to impact school improvement planning. Maybe a state was just a little worried that it might get some negative feedback, so they didn't include the good stuff in the plan. So again, that's the optimist in me. What it comes down to, though, state ESSA plans can be a couple of things, and it seems to me we have the range. They could be a political document, right? Statement of some stand and value, set of values. They could be a compliance document, or they could be a coherence map. And I think very few have chosen the latter, and more have chosen either the political or the compliance or a combination of the two. So with all that, then, let's just step back for a second and say, of course, the Every Student Succeeds Act is about more than plans, right? What did we get in the law itself? What do we still have, and what do we need to keep fighting for going forward? So what we got as a result of having ESSA is the continued focus on equity that has always been a part of ESEA, ensuring that concentrations of students who most need the funding get it. Of course, that's federal. It doesn't account for a lot of things that are not really happening very well at the state level. What else do we get from ESSA? We do still have the opportunity to reset accountability and allow a move away from fixation on high stakes testing. We definitely do still have that. I want to share a quick other example besides Pennsylvania, and that's New York State. Also, recently shortened the length of time of its state tests, allowing more time for students to take them when they need them. It's involving teachers in question development, and they're releasing more test questions after the fact. And hopefully, as a result of that, we'll actually reduce the dropout problem, which, as you know, is pretty big in New York State. So how did that all happen? It's not just ESSA. It's the law itself. It's advocacy of union teachers and parents. It's having reasonable policymakers, right? The other thing that ESSA is about that is incredibly important is that it got the federal government out of teacher evaluation. So teacher evaluation may be out of the headlines, but I think it's important for us to remember that it's still extremely important, not as a point in time, but as part of a comprehensive teacher development, support, and improvement continuum. So it's a contentious area, but now we have lots more opportunity to address that, both at a local level and at a state level. And finally, under NCLB, it's amazing, if we think back, that federal funding became contingent upon, in essence, using test scores and teacher evaluation, right? It was debunked everywhere, from the American Psychological Association, the National Research Council, pretty much everywhere but in the law governing K-12 education. That is no longer the case. So that is a pretty cool thing. So I just have 4 quick thoughts to share about what we can still do, what we should be thinking about. So we can still do stakeholder engagement. It's part of the law. It wasn't just part of the plans, right? It is ESSA going forward. So that provides lots of opportunities for communities, for parents, for educators, for union leaders to keep that voice aloud, even if it's not being listened to as much as we hope it would be in a number of areas. Most importantly, I think, engaging around school improvement planning going forward, both at the local level where the plans are made and at the state level where they're monitored and supported. We are no longer limited to a set of prescribed models, so there are things we can do. We can make sure that needs assessments address the whole child. We can make sure that needs assessments address the assets and needs of the teaching force and the community. We can advocate for evidence-based interventions, and this piece on community schools is one of my favorites. There are lots of other sources, from Evidence for ESSA that Johns Hopkins manages, the website, to lots of knowledge about professional capacity building approaches to school improvement that can inform this. So we need to keep advocating around school improvement as those plans do get developed. The last thing I would say we need to advocate for is transparency and public reporting in communicating goals and progress regularly and understandably toward those goals. Most plans don't say how they're going to do that. Those states do have to do that. And one thing we should be arguing for in the context of that is using real numbers of real students when you can, not talking about proficiency rates and percentages, but or how much proficiency increased, but say instead, this many kids are reading or doing, this many more kids are reading or doing math at this level, at the appropriate level than were before, right? Communicate, understand, and build engagement. And the last thing, of course, is to share success stories. If there are places where this is working, we need to hear about it and share and advocate, because fundamentally, it is the main law that governs public schools in this country, and we need to be able to show the strength and the power of public schools and public education. And I will stop there.